snow had been falling since noon, and by the time Marcus pulled the last string of lights from the tangled mess in the garage bin, the front yard looked like a greeting card nobody had bothered to send. 2 years. 2 Christmases since the divorce. Papers were signed on a Tuesday in February, the cruelest month to end a marriage, he always thought. Though maybe every month felt cruel when you were sitting across a conference table from the woman you'd once slow danced with at your cousin's wedding in Savannah. 2 years since he'd learned how to make French toast for dinner because his daughter, Lily, thought breakfast food at nighttime was the greatest discovery in human history. 2 years since he'd figured out that a 7-year-old's Christmas morning could still feel like magic, even when the living room was smaller and the tree came in a box and the man putting it together was doing his level best not to cry into the ornament hooks. He had found a rhythm. That was the word his therapist used. Rhythm. Marcus had come to love the sound of it. Christmas Eve this year was shaping up to be exactly what he'd planned. Lily was with her mother. That was the agreement. Alternating holidays, so Marcus had the apartment to himself. He'd bought a small bottle of bourbon. He'd rented 2 movies he actually wanted to watch. He'd ordered a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store like a man who had fully accepted his circumstances and was not at all devastated about them. He was doing fine. He was absolutely, completely fine. The knock came at 6:47 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. His buddy Terrence had invited him to a party across town, but Marcus had politely declined, preferring the company of bourbon and George Bailey over small talk and pretending to be jolly. His mother was in Atlanta with his sister. There was no one who would knock on his door on Christmas Eve in a snowstorm. He opened it anyway. Standing on the small concrete porch, dusted with snowflakes and holding a foil-covered dish, was Renata. Not his ex-wife. Her sister. Renata was 3 years younger than Diane, which made her 34. She had Diane's same sharp cheekbones, but her father's quieter eyes, and she'd always been the kind of person Marcus genuinely liked back when he was still allowed to genuinely like people connected to his ex-wife's family. She lived 40 minutes away in a suburb she'd always complained about but never left. She taught 3rd grade. She made a sweet potato casserole that Marcus had, on more than one occasion, described as life-changing. She was holding that casserole right now. "Renata," he said. "Marcus," she said. They stood there for a moment, the snow falling between them with complete indifference to the awkwardness of the situation. "I was at my aunt's," she said, "and I made too much. And I thought, I don't know what I thought. I thought you might be alone." She paused. "Are you alone?" "I was planning to be alone," he said. "There's a difference." She smiled, just barely. "There really is." He stepped aside and let her in. The apartment was warm. He'd actually remembered to turn the heat up that afternoon, which felt like a small personal victory. The Christmas tree, the one from the box, was lit up in the corner, draped with the ornaments Lily had made at school, lopsided felt stars and painted popsicle stick frames, with her own gap-toothed photo inside. Marcus had put every single one of them on the tree. He hadn't been able to bring himself to use the nice glass ornaments from his and Diane's married life. Those were in a box in the closet. Maybe one day. Renata looked at the tree without saying anything sentimental, which he appreciated. She set the casserole on the kitchen counter, and he found 2 forks because plates suddenly felt like more of a commitment than he was ready for. And they sat on the couch the way people sit when they're being careful with each other. Not close, not dramatically far, just 2 people on a couch negotiating the geometry of an unexpected evening. "How's Lily?" she asked. "She lost 2 more teeth," he said. "She's convinced the tooth fairy runs some kind of black market operation. She's been researching what the teeth are actually used for." Renata laughed. "A real one." "That sounds exactly like her. She's with Diane tonight." "I know." She said it simply, without apology. "Diane's doing okay, in case you were wondering, or weren't wondering. Either way, I'm glad she's okay," Marcus said, and meant it more or less. The anger had mostly burned off in the first year. What was left was something quieter and harder to name. Not resentment exactly, more like grief for a version of his life that had simply stopped existing. You couldn't be mad at grief. You just had to let it take up its corner of the room. "Are you okay?" Renata asked. Nobody asked Marcus that directly anymore. People asked how things were going, how Lily was doing, how work was treating him. Nobody just looked at him and asked. If he was okay, like they actually wanted the real answer. I'm working on it, he said. She nodded. That was enough. They ate the sweet potato casserole with forks straight from the dish, which felt appropriately chaotic for Christmas Eve in the second year of his new life. He put on a movie, not the one he'd planned. Something lighter. And at some point he made coffee and she didn't leave. And they talked the way people talk when they've both been carrying quiet things for a long time and suddenly the weight feels negotiable. She told him that teaching third grade had broken her heart 3 times that fall alone. One kid whose parents were deployed. One kid whose grandmother, the only stable person in his life, had gotten sick. One kid who just cried every Monday morning without explaining why. And Renata had started keeping a small box of crackers in her desk drawer specifically for that child, because sometimes the only thing you could do was make sure someone wasn't hungry while they were sad. Marcus told her about the night in October when Lily had called him from Diane's house at 10 p.m., crying because she missed him and didn't know how to stop missing 2 places at once. How he'd stayed on the phone with her for 40 minutes, making up a story about a girl who lived in a castle with 2 towers and loved both of them equally and never had to choose. And how by the end, Lily was laughing, but he'd had to sit in his kitchen for a long time afterward, in the dark, before he could get up. "You're a good dad," Renata said. "I'm trying to be," he said. "That's all any of us are doing," she said. Trying. She left around 10 before the snow got worse on the roads. At the door, she picked up her coat and her now empty casserole dish and stood for a moment in the way. People stand when a conversation has been real, and neither person quite knows how to close it. "Thank you for letting me in," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Thank you for knocking," he said. "I wasn't sure I wanted company." "Did you?" He thought about the bourbon he'd barely touched, the movie he'd barely watched, the way the apartment had felt, less like solitude and more like silence before she arrived. And the difference between those 2 things was something he'd been confusing for 2 years. "Yeah," he said. "I think I did." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that doesn't promise anything, which is the only kind worth trusting. After she left, Marcus stood at the window and watched her car pull carefully out of the snow-covered parking lot. Then he looked at the tree, at Lily's lopsided felt stars and her gap-toothed photograph, and he felt something he hadn't quite felt in a while. Not happiness exactly, but the possibility of it. The sense that the future was not already written. That a knock on the door on a snowy Christmas Eve could change the shape of an evening, and maybe, slowly, other things too. He didn't know what came next. He wasn't sure he was supposed to. He put the casserole dish in the sink, turned off the kitchen light, and settled back onto the couch. Outside, the snow was still falling, patient and indifferent and quietly beautiful, covering the parking lot and the roads, and the whole ordinary American neighborhood in something that looked, from the inside, almost exactly like Grace. He sat with that for a while. It was enough. It was, he thought, more than enough.